Now, with countries like the US, the UK and India all starting vaccine campaigns, there are lots of questions about fair access. People in developing nations simply might not be able to get vaccines as richer countries take what they need first, in some cases more than what they need. According to an international vaccine watchdog group, in 67 poorer nations, just 1 in 10 people can hope to receive a vaccine by the end of next year. Countries representing just 14% of the world's population own more than half of the most promising vaccines. In fact, Canada purchased enough doses to immunise citizens 5 times over. Tom Boyke is the Director of Global Health at the Council on Foreign Relations. He joins me now from Washington, and thanks so much for doing so. I wanted to start with something you wrote in foreignaffairs.com, and I'll just quote from it. Vaccine nationalism or a my country first approach to allocation will have profound, far-reaching consequences. Tell us about those consequences.
So those consequences start with prolonging the pandemic. Taking an approach where you treat this virus as if it knew national borders is the wrong way to go. Allowing the virus to circulate unabated in nations means that it'll have larger health consequences, larger economic consequences, but that ultimately will make even nations with vaccines less safe because we won't be able to vaccinate our population, full populations for a period of time. As we've seen in recent weeks, there have been mutations. So it also allowing it to spread elsewhere increases the risk of that. But the last point that I think is really important for viewers to understand is if we cannot cooperate on equitably distributing a vaccine in the midst of a deadly pandemic when it is in all of our interests to cooperate, what global challenge will we be able to cooperate on? So it undermines our prospects of working together as nations to prevent the next pandemic or other challenges like climate change.
And that is a really good point, probably the biggest one. I mean, CNN's reported that wealthy countries have bought enough vaccine doses to immunise their populations 3 times over. What can developing nations actually do as they suffer through the pandemic other than raise their hands and hope somebody shows compassion?
So the options, I'm sorry to say, are limited. Vaccines are fundamentally different than small molecule drugs like those HIV drugs that some viewers may remember. Most countries cannot make them, and it will take time to expand the manufacturing capacity necessary to do so. So the options to poor nations without vaccines really are twofold. One is to increase the pressure, as you suggested, raise your hands and increase the pressure on nations to participate in the multilateral initiative, try to get the resources that that multilateral initiative called COVAX needs to succeed. The second is they can turn to the sources of vaccines that are available to them, which is likely in this case to be the vaccines from China and Russia, which, provided they are independently verified, they go through the proper regulatory channels, that would be great. But right now, none of those vaccines have done so. So it's worrisome.
Yeah, and the other sort of reality, of course, is pharmaceutical companies aren't charities. Do you expect pharmaceutical companies to perhaps put profit aside or put it first when it comes to nations which just can't afford the high cost of vaccine purchase or distribution? Should they be forced to?
Absolutely. I think the pharmaceutical companies actually want to do the right thing here. The reason is they don't want a repeat of that HIV scenario that I alluded to before. 20 years ago, the pharmaceutical companies found themselves on the wrong side of a lawsuit with the South African government over access to medicines called 39 Pharmaceutical Companies v. Nelson Mandela. They do not want another scenario like that. The challenge that has happened is that most of their stocks have been bought up, and vaccine manufacturing capacity is really scarce. It is going to take work to try to expand those options. So even Pfizer has offered to sell 50 million doses to African nations of its vaccine, but because of the cold chain requirements, it needs to be kept really at a low temperature to distribute. They've been hesitant to do so. There's a real difficulty getting the supplies to where they need to go soonest.
Yeah. One hopes that the me first attitude doesn't prevail because billions of people will suffer otherwise. Tom Boyke, an important issue. Thanks so much for speaking with us.
My great pleasure. Thanks for having me.